you're currently working on a novel or hope to one day make a career out of book writing, then you've likely come across the question of whether you should write a series or a standalone novel. There are so many examples of huge blockbuster series from Lord of the Rings to Harry Potter, so it makes sense that you might want to consider writing a series because, after all, series like those have enormous readerships. And in fact, you might already have some gears turning about what the next installment in your book with your same characters might be. But not every single story should be made into a series, so today I want to walk through a framework to help you determine whether the story that you're working on or thinking about writing should be made into a series or kept as a standalone. If you're anywhere along the book writing journey or you're interested in potentially publishing one day, I recommend subscribing to my channel. Every week I either go through writing tips or offer insight on the publishing industry, and I'd love to have you around. So I'm going to structure this video by going through 3 key questions that you need to ask yourself in order to determine if your book should be a standalone or a series. The first question is, how do you intend to publish? This is ultimately one of the most important questions that you need to ask yourself before deciding whether to move forward with a series or keeping the book as a standalone. As you know, there are different publishing paths that you can take. There is self-publishing, where you are entirely in control of the publishing process. On the other side, there is traditional publishing, which is where you get a book deal with a publishing house in order to publish your book. And there's also hybrid publishing, which incorporates elements of both. If you are still considering your publishing options or would like some more clarity on what those 3 types of publishing options entail, I recommend checking out my video on how to publish your book. I go through all 3 in more detail. Now, it is totally okay if you don't have an answer yet in which method you're going to use to publish your book. It is completely understandable if you're still in the draft stages of your book. However, it will really be helpful for you to think through these options in tandem with considering whether your book is a series or a standalone. If you are leaning towards traditional publishing, which is having an established publishing house publish your book, then it is typically best to present your book as a standalone, even when you are first reaching out to literary agents to secure representation, which is the first step in the traditional publishing process. And the reason that I recommend going with standalone for this route is because the literary agent, in the vast majority of cases, is going to have to first sell this first book to the publishing house before they agree to sell any more books. Basically, the publishing house is not going to, in most cases, want to make you a deal for an entire series without first publishing the first installment and seeing how that goes, seeing if that has some healthy sales, and then if it does, they will want to continue with the series. But they really need to test that first book out initially, because if they publish it and then there's unfortunately no readership, it's unlikely that they are going to be able to put in the investment to publish the entire series. If you envision the book that you're working on as the start of a series, or you at least want to keep the series door open, that doesn't mean it's game over for traditional publishing at all. What I recommend doing in this scenario is presenting the book as a standalone novel with series potential, which leaves that door open. However, it will still ensure that this novel delivers a rounded and satisfying conclusion without requiring a next installment. But again, it leaves the door open. If the book was to sell well, then you could expand on it with a series. It's unfortunately just not very common for publishers to take a risk on a debut author and buy a whole series or a trilogy up front. However, it is absolutely possible that they would take the first book from you, publish it as a standalone, see how it does, and then potentially expand on it as a series from there. Now, on the flip side, if you plan to self-publish, you are in complete control of the publishing process. And in this case, I do see some potential benefits to publishing a series. For instance, publishing regularly, say 1 book in the series per year, helps to establish a readership and helps you grow your author platform because you will have readers returning to you expecting that next book in the series. You will, of course, also have the opportunity to gain revenue from all the different books in the series rather than putting all your eggs in one basket and only trying to generate sales from one book. Keep in mind that with self-publishing, you are in complete control of the publishing schedule as well. So you will have the flexibility to publish as many installments in the series as you want to. You're not going to have a publisher telling you the series only has to be a certain length or that you can't have a series at all. It is totally up to you. However, I would caution that you make sure that each and every book in that series is a very, very high quality, that it is up to standard, that it is properly edited, that it is well designed, because that is going to be what keeps readers coming back. And if you just throw books out there for the sake of it without really doing the proper work to ensure that they are high quality, that's really not going to do you any favors. So now that we've talked about how your publishing path affects whether you go with a standalone or a series, I want to talk about the next question you need to consider, which is, what is the genre of your book? There are certain genres that more naturally lend themselves towards series. These would be fantasy, sci-fi, and mystery and crime, especially subgenres like police procedurals where you are following a specific detective as they solve different cases. If you are writing any of these genres, it is more likely that your audience is going to respond positively to a series and be interested in buying multiple books following the same characters. There are other genres that typically are not written as series, which would include nonfiction or memoir, literary fiction, and psychological thrillers. Those genres tend to pretty much only produce standalone books. That doesn't mean that the authors can't write in the same genre. In many, many cases, they do produce more books in that genre, even books with a similar theme or a similar feel. However, they will not be exactly series or involve the exact same characters or the exact same world. There are a handful of genres that could go either way, where we do see plenty of standalone and we do see plenty of series. Those would be YA, romance, and historical fiction. If you're not totally clear on which genre your book falls into, I recommend checking out my video where I go through the most common fiction genres to help you pinpoint that down. So now that we've talked about your publishing path as well as your book's genre, the third and final question that I want you to consider when thinking about writing a series or a standalone book is, how far can you really push your characters? This is arguably the most important question to answer when you're figuring out if your book is a series or a standalone. However, it is also the toughest to answer. We've all read or watched series where the next installment just keeps getting better and better, and it is truly bingeable from beginning to end. And we have all found series that really fizzle out and the ending portions don't deliver the same excitement that the first portions do. You want to ensure that you do not lose your reader's interest as you reach the middle and ending portions of your series. To do that, you want to ensure that each and every installment is justified and that there truly is more to develop and explore with the characters' journeys. Ultimately, no series should just keep going on and on forever. It has to end at some point, and you as the author should be able to determine when you've pushed your characters enough and it is time to close out this chapter and this series. And ultimately, it is really, really important for you as the author to be able to find that point where it just is time to end the series and you have told these characters' stories in their entirety. So try to find the point at which you have exhausted the story, the characters have done everything they could possibly do, and the story is going to satisfy the readers with a rounded conclusion. Because if you push the series too far beyond its natural limits, then it's going to potentially start to feel outlandish, the plot might become repetitive, and you might end up losing your readers. I hope these tips and framework help you determine if your book should be a series or a standalone. Let me know in the comments what type of project you're working on, whether you envision it as the start of a series or it's the middle of a series, the end of a series, or if you're writing it as a standalone. I'd love to learn more about what you're working on. And if you're in the midst of writing, I recommend checking out my video on finding the right novel length. That's also a structural element that's really important to think about as you're working on your draft, because just as you should know whether the novel is a standalone or a series, You should also try to figure out the word count range that you are ultimately aiming for before you publish. As always, if you found this video helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It helps me know that I'm bringing you content that is helpful and allows me to continue growing this community. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing.